Welcome to Rich Conversations. I'm very energized to be here. We're in Miami. We have this lovely space, and I'm joined by Shelby Thomas. Thanks for being here. This is the fourth time, but third year in a row in Miami. So it's always a special treat to see you in person.
Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Now, something that's kind of on my mind when I come to Miami or warm places, coming from the Midwest, like I don't know what you're supposed to do about sunscreen. You live in Florida. Do you apply it all the time? No?
I'm probably a bad representative. I really don't. I rarely put sunscreen on. I don't know if that means maybe I'm more adapted to just growing up here, but sunscreen can be a controversial topic, especially because now we're looking at all the ingredients that are in them. And just regardless of if it's an environmental consideration, it's become more of a health consideration that it's not the best things that are in them. So although when I do put sunscreen on, it's typically reef safe because I am in the water a lot. But frankly, I really don't do as much sunscreen as I should. But
that's what I was wondering. It's like if you're living in Miami or Florida, are you going to put the effort in to do it every single day? That seems like a lot.
Yeah, I would say I do not, but I, work out and eat well and have a lot of water. So I guess I rely on my body's natural mechanisms, but I do, if I know I'm going to be in the sun all day, I'll try to put on sunscreen more.
So that's a recent thing, right? Like ingredients in sunscreen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like what is unhealthy or healthy for you. It's like if you use this deodorant, you're not supposed to have this ingredient. If you have shampoo, you're not supposed to do that. And then if you eat this, it's not supposed to have that. Like I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you kind of just like, I'm just gonna be in the water. I'm gonna exercise. I'm gonna do those things.
Yeah, I mean, I do use sunscreen, but typically they're, either the zinc or mineral based. If I'm going to be in the water, that stays on your skin. It's like you look kind of pasty, but it certainly works, and that's a more natural form of sunscreen. The sunscreens you're supposed to avoid are oxybenzone types that actually have chemicals that are just generally bad for your body anyway, but also bad for the environment. That certainly applies to other products, like you're saying, like hair care. I'm sure you've heard of like sulfate-free. So that's becoming more popular for a lot of products, being aware of the things that are in them. But you're right, there's no really great source for, okay, what's the best products for me to use as a all-around daily consumer? And definitely something that we should make more publicly accessible and like easy to find, so people are doing what's right for their health and for the environment. But I'm not aware of a single source that provides all of those suggested products per se.
So you have this ingredient that could be harmful, but then if you subtract it or make a product absent of it, you can then charge more for it, right?
I'm sure people
so
do
then
that,
it becomes really boutique-y and stuff.
Somewhat. I think on the sunscreen side, it's less streamlined to charge more for it. I think it's slightly upcharged, but because so many people are aware of it, I think it's drove the cost down. And maybe that's something that, especially from a health perspective, we could start looking at as a broader context of having more regulations around what's in the products. So then it does drive the cost down for every manufacturer to make things that are, both better for the environment and your own skin. But in terms of regulation on, topical products, I'm not aware of any massive regulation on that by the government. But our skin is our biggest organ, fun fact. So it is very important to be aware of what we're absorbing. The biggest thing I say is just, your health and diet's the biggest component of internally running your body and keeping it healthy, but also lots of water and hydration. So in areas like Florida, you want to be more well hydrated, I'd say, versus others, especially because the humidity, and a lot of people can sweat, especially if you're coming from a different state. You might think it's a little more humid. I'm used to it. I actually love it. But compared to the dry heat, if you go to Arizona or Texas. It's a totally different climate, but yeah.
I love this weather. I get why you guys live down here.
Yeah, more
It's
and more
very
people
obvious.
are moving here, so
I can
everybody's
tell. I can
catching
tell.
on.
There's construction everywhere.
Everywhere, traffic everywhere in Miami, yeah.
Traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll push the pressures on making more streamlined ways for public and transportation, because you can only build up so much. Like, we're not building the roads any wider.
Yeah.
So it'd be curious to see how this place is in like 10 years. Especially during Art Basel and big events that tend to be year round now. So.
Yeah, I always enjoy when I travel places taking public transportation.
Yeah.
I do it here. I get right when I'm
Right
at the
line?
airport, I get the 7-day pass. And I cruise around on the buses and the Miami Movers and the Metro Rail.
Nice.
In New York. New York obviously is pretty,
Efficient.
yeah, pretty available public transportation. Los Angeles, I was in Los Angeles. There's a subway system in Los Angeles. Did you know that?
I've heard about it, but I don't, not enough, clearly. You know, I've never used it. I don't
All
know
those
if I-
movies shot in LA, and I haven't
Nothing
seen a
ever.
single scene of the LA
Is it sa-
subway.
Is it safe down there?
It's fine. People are moving around there. I don't know.
Okay. I don't know.
I don't know. Anyways, so we're talking about infrastructure, and Shelby, we're talking about health, not only for individuals and humans, but also as a whole, as a collective. We're talking about infrastructure and the importance of that, which is a perfect segue for Shelby and the
Underwater
work that you do.
infrastructure.
Now, this would be really cool to look back at the episodes and see the progression of the projects that you've been working on. Last year, you were talking about this 7-mile art coral reef system, right? What's the update on that?
Yeah, so we're just now getting some of the final approvals and contracts done with the city, and we're part of a project called Reef Line, which is going to be a 7-mile underwater art park that consists of custom artistic reef sculptures that are the highlight elements, but it also brings in artificial structures for habitat and restoration purposes. So really it's going to be an accessible site from shore that's snorkelable. That will certainly be an ecotourism destination, but the goal is to really focus on habitat and awareness around marine conservation. And that's a little different from, although we've done a lot of artistic projects throughout South Florida, and we're doing 4 new independent sites with the city of Hollywood this year. This is really like another higher level echelon. The group that we work with, and the woman, Jimena Caminos, who's actually part of this Faena hotel that we're sitting in. She's an artistic curator, brilliant, kind of mastermind around artistic elements. She was involved with the Underline, which is a publicly accessible art project here in Miami.
I was just there yesterday.
Yeah. And so there's Highline, Underline, and this is Reef Line. And so she's really been the curatorial mastermind behind all of it, and I partnered with her with my nonprofit Ocean Rescue Alliance to really bring more of the habitat elements into the project and some of the science planning for any coral outplanting and restoration that we plan to engage with as the project moves forward.
Wow.
So it's going to be probably a 7 to 10 year project, but we're right now looking to put out one major art installation as part of phase 1, which will be, it's a traffic jam, but it's called Concrete Coral by Leandro Elrich. And we'll be putting out 40 of my Ocean Rescue Alliance habitat structures, which are strictly for marine habitat and coral outplanting. And in addition, we're doing the Carlos Betancourt stars, which is going to be a series of different starfish, a bunch of different designs that kind of symbolize an underwater, kind of aquatic symphony of stars. And it's kind of mirroring the stars in the sky and connection to the ocean, and lots of engagement opportunities. The other art concepts are to be determined, so that we'll eventually have some calls out for artists. There are certain criteria that they have to work within. But right now we have several other art installations planned. Another one is Heart of Okeanos by Petrok Sesti, He has a model of a blue whale heart, which symbolizes the biggest mammal heart in the world, which will be the heart of the ocean that will also be sunk. So those are kind of phase 2 art concepts, and every art initiative will be tied in with habitat structures. So I'm helping kind of bring in that element of the work that we do with my nonprofit to this larger project. And so those three phases are planned out right now, but certainly there'll be many more to come. It'll take some years to meet the 7 miles, but we're starting with right here off of South Beach.
You're starting.
Yeah,
which
finally
is
starting. Yeah,
amazing.
So it's exciting.
And just briefly summarize again what your organization does and the things that you create.
Yeah, so Ocean Rescue Alliance is a marine conservation and restoration nonprofit. We focus on implementing innovative techniques to scale marine restoration. A lot of that's done through artificial structure, so we use artificial reefs and different structure designs to help build habitat, aid in coastal protection, enhancing marine environments, restoration of corals, oysters, and mangroves, and also using art as to connect people back to the ocean. And so each of those look a little different depending on the function that they're designated for. So we'll really look at each site independently of what kind of designs we're going to be doing for it. And we have a foundation element that touches each of those sectors I just mentioned. And once the sites are out there, we focus on building programs such as citizen science and being able to do research that can bring the public in, not only make a dive destination, but being able to actually do research that contributes to sustainable restoration.
It's fabulous. It's amazing. And so the last time we were recording in Surfside, Florida, a little bit more...
On Earth Day.
On Earth Day.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. On Earth Day?
It was after an Earth Day event, yeah.
Yeah. This is the first time we've had a controlled environment, so we don't have to worry about the wind or birds chirping or iguanas invading our space.
Yeah.
So it's nice. It's nice. We were talking about scale last time, and how kind of the next chapter or focus that you had was to take what you're doing and then scale it. So it's, in the last year, is that...
Yeah, I mean, certainly. The other year, we were just doing really one reef project a year in terms of deployments. Now we're doing 5 in 1 year. So that's definitely scaling it up. And we are starting a coral lab, which we're aiming to produce at least 50,000 corals, if not more, per facility. And that's turned into another facility that we're starting in Lauderdale by the Sea, merging with Reef Discovery Center. So it's quickly gained some steam, and we now have multiple projects going out in the water and facilities that we're scaling up for restoration.
As much as I love this space, I was kind of energized to see like the big corals at the facility that you were just at. Is that what I'm picturing? Is that these big coral structures?
Not the big structures, no.
Okay.
So there's kind of I call it a gray and green. So the reefs, our artificial reefs, are gray infrastructure. So that's an eco-friendly concrete that we designed to replicate natural reef geology and have more of a habitat function. So you can think of it as the skeleton of the foundation. And the green is the actual living coral animal. So that's where we will, come in and actually put out living coral onto the gray infrastructure. So we call it merging gray and green infrastructure. The lab that we were going to meet at was actually where we're growing the living coral that would be outplanted onto the structures. And the colleague of mine that I work with, Colin Ford, who is part of Coral Morphologic, they have a beautiful lab of a lot of Indo-Pacific corals that kind of brings the coral to the forefront in storytelling, and also lots of different designs and digital media, and they do all kinds of artwork. They've even done projection maps of corals on museums here. They have the Coral City camera, which is a live stream 24/7 camera that's right here on a reef in Miami, right off the port, and you can see corals year round, so it's pretty cool. You can just put it on your TV or your computer in the background and see marine life going in its natural habitat. So we're planning to put a few cameras out on some of our reefs partnered with them, but
Okay.
this facility that we're going to meet at is a partnership with Coral Morphologic and Ocean Rescue Alliance to build more like a WeWork of coral. So we'll be having different tanks dedicated to different projects, all aiming to do outplanting and restoration, but we'll have some different spaces allocated for each project initiative.
What are these cameras like? They're underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Are they like GoPros or are they like big ones?
It's actually, I think their first camera was almost like a home security camera that rotates 360, and it has a dome over it that has a wiper, but you can also clean it. So Colin actually goes out I don't know if it's every week or every other week, and hand cleans the camera, the dome. But the camera just rotates, and he can rotate it from his phone. It's hardwired off the port, and so you could watch it live and see sharks and parrotfish and all kinds of things swim by.
So you said it's wired from the port.
Mm-hmm. So it's essentially a hardwired camera that they run a line down into the water, and it hooks up to the camera. So it's all waterproof and safe, but that limits like where you're able to put the camera, because you have to have some shore access. Although a lot of those companies we're trying to find ways we could do it with like a solar buoy or something like that, but it's still hard to get the technology to work right to be consistent.
Is that a thing? A solar buoy?
Yeah, there's a few companies trying to do that, mostly for data management and like collecting water samples, and even creating, we work with this group at FIU that's calling them underwater swarms. They're like trying to find basically an underwater Wi-Fi, but communicating underwater is much different for technology. So they have these underwater drones that they're trying to sync that could go to different data points, collect data, and return to their home base at a buoy. They're still in development for this, but there's many projects. There's now a drone that does air and sea. I think it's
What's
like
that?
$150,000, but it's a drone that they can take footage and do it's basically like a remote ROV without a cable. So it can dive in the water and then become an underwater drone.
So is it a drone that can fly and also swim?
Yes.
So it's
Amphibious.
It's not, but it's even more than amphibious, right? Because it can fly.
Yeah.
What do you call that?
I don't know I forget the name
Is there
of
a
it.
name?
Huh?
Is there a name for that?
I don't know. The company, it's really new. They've been going to a lot of research conferences and trying to connect with scientists. So it's pretty neat. We just don't necessarily need that right now. Unless someone wants to donate it, we'll definitely use it.
What's the tech you're most energized for in marine biology?
For me, what's most applicable is some of the 3D printing capacities of us being able to scale structures without reducing cost with technology, and being able to map and design things more efficiently. Something that excites me on more of the mapping side, there's a thing called Allen Coral Atlas. So we could actually use some digital maps and satellite maps to actually better inform things going on with, for example, algal blooms or water quality, and targeting areas that might need more help. From a higher level, you can actually see a lot that's going on in the water. And so we could even plan projects out that way. We could make alert systems for if something's going wrong with an algal bloom, for example. So that's really exciting. I think using technology and AI in that way as indicators in a way to be more efficient is exciting. And then of course there's some, crazy science, and now the Trident submarines made a 7-person sub that just launched last month. So there's a lot of technology advancements happening in the ocean right now.
What's the difference? 2 questions. What's an algal bloom? And then what's the significance of a 7-person sub compared to what it was before?
Yeah. So an algal bloom or algae bloom is essentially, it's a natural process, but a lot of fertilizers and runoffs can go into the water, cause high nutrients, and then it becomes an algal bloom where the algae just eats up all of those nutrients, clouds out, creates turbidity where basically you can't see through the water because there's so much algae. And algae, it's also consuming oxygen and different things as it's growing. So often you get completely drastic shifts in the water parameters that affect fish. And so if you've ever heard of a harmful algal bloom, that's like red tide. It's a red algae that affects a lot of areas, like in Florida, on the West Coast, particularly even like in Tampa where I live. Mostly in like the Sarasota region, they get the harmful algae bloom every year now, especially because of the warming temperatures, eutrophication of the runoff of nutrients, and it creates this toxicity effect where actually there's toxins affect the fish and there's a die-off. And you'll see, if you've seen all the news of the dead fish, you know, in Miami as well as throughout Florida, a lot of it's due to these algae blooms. And so those are things like runoff that really contribute to making that spike, although it is a natural cycle, but just not at the rate and frequency that we're seeing it. So you can see all kinds of algae blooms all over the world. You'll even see it in lakes, right? Or if you go to the springs here and you see like duckweed all over the place. It used to be a clear spring, and then now there's like green, looks like almost like fuzzy small leaf pads all over. And if you go diving, it's like all over your gear. That's been increasing just because the sheer amount of runoff and issues that we're having. Also, water not being able to go into the water table because we have so much construction. There's a big shift to look at like permeable walkways and driving routes, because stormwater drains often like cause a lot of that runoff because the water doesn't have time to simply just sink into the table of water. The state of Florida is really limestone. So we have a very porous foundation that we rely on. We have so many aquifers in the state of Florida. And so a lot of this is affected by, you know, construction, and Everglades are a natural filtration for some of this water that's been affected from, you know, development. It's kind of like how we have deforestation. We're having the same thing happen throughout the Everglades from people, you know, building up infrastructure. That was a little shift. But so algae blooms, you know, tied into that. I got a little deeper there for a second, but it's something to be aware of, right? Because we could help reduce the point source and reduce some of those algae blooms from happening. Your second question was...
The submarines.
Submarines. It's really less relevant to some of my work, but it just allows you to have more scientists and researchers. It used to be like 1 or 2 people could go. Now bringing 7 people, it's more economical. They could also do different experiences with people. These are, you know, much different subs than what were on the news of the one that imploded. Totally different.
What's the difference with them?
The one that imploded had a lot of controversy around it. It was also ran in like another country, completely like exempt of laws that like had any regulation on it. Also the material, you know, I'm not by all means a sub expert, but from my understanding is the material could not expand and contract. They didn't know the number of times that it can do that. And when you're going under extreme pressure, like going to visit the Titanic, you know, thousands of feet down in the water, you're going under intense pressure, cooler water. And as you're going up and back and forth, it can only expand so much, like carbon fiber, for example. And matching that, you know, it's just a matter of time. The subs that Trident uses has a lot more technology involved. It's a different material. And actually the one that, you know, was in the news a while back, Boeing was initially contracted to make it, and they said no. And they backed out of the contract.
Boeing said no?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I forget the manufacturer that made that one that they had. I forget the name of it. But, you know, now they're that just also for me, some people were like, well, that makes me not want to get in a sub. I would still get in a sub, but just making sure that it's a technologically like advanced one, and it's the ones in the States are regulated and have way more technology. If anything, that really showed, like, I don't know if you saw the news on that. They showed how like basically like a gaming remote like controller was controlling that sub.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think it just calls attention to how much technology development we need into our oceans, because we really know nothing about our oceans relatively to its size. We've only explored 5% now. It used to be 4%. but we still have only explored 5%. We've only protected 8% of it, despite the planet being covered in 70% water. And new things are discovered almost every day. So it's pretty intriguing for me, like on the technology side, like the 7-person sub, for example. You just have a lot more. You could bring different scientists down. You can bring a benthic ecologist, a fisheries population scientist, and be able to commingle everybody in the same space to make a lot more rapid assessments of things, and therefore do more work under the same trip.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
So we're only at 5%?
5% explored.
Is that just because it's vastness and our limited technology, or?
It's definitely not limited technology. For me, it's a focus. It's almost like that goes back to like a humanity perspective. Like, right, we're always reaching for the stars, and frankly, we've explored more into our our outer space. We've explored more into outer space than our oceans, which is pretty crazy. I mean, we're taking samples from Mars, right? So the fact that we aren't making clean energy out of our ocean, our most abundant resource, that we haven't explored like the greatest depths and different dynamics of the ocean is pretty wild to me, if we're doing all these things in outer space, right? But I think that speaks to like the human component of like presence, right? Like if we already got it right here, so like let's just go a little further, and we're curious about things we don't know. And I think so many people don't really realize how much we don't know is in the ocean. And frankly, that's what intrigued me to get into the space of conservation and oceans in general, just because I went from initially studying secondary metabolites from coral because I wanted to go into medicine going into college. But I was like, okay, if I was a doctor, I'd want to be a surgeon or do something interesting where I'm not seeing like, you become a specialist, and typically people are seeing, like, let's say you're a foot doctor. You know everything about how to fix a foot, but that's all you see, right? Yeah. And you're like a specialist in that area, and generally people specialize. And I just was like, I wouldn't want to be inside all day either. And if I was
especially
a surgeon,
you like being
no, I like being out. And being a surgeon, you get a little bit more diversity, right, of things that happen. If you were like, for example, an ER surgeon. But I was also always curious with the ocean. So I was like, could we like have medicine in the ocean? There's lots of animals. For example, the cone snail has 100 times the potency of Taxol, which is what we use to treat breast cancer. And Taxol is driven from the bark of the yew tree, and a lot of our medicines are driven from plants. Well, some of our most heavily evolved animals are in the ocean and have been there for much longer, like coral reefs. They also have these properties like secondary metabolites, which are essentially defense chemicals that their bodies and proteins have that have anti-cancer properties that are already way more potent than what we're currently treating cancer with. So for me, just that is very intriguing, and we saw so much prospect in just literally blind sampling in undergrad. We would blind sample sponges and sea squirts in intertidal areas. So like that's not a lot of selection. But if you look at isolation, if you were diving, for example, and one coral colony was warding off other corals from going near it, you can tell that has some kind of strong defense chemical, that this coral is not encroaching on me, right?
Yeah.
And it's holding its own, and it's expanding its space. And so this animal, right, it's able to defend itself just being sedentary. And so to me, that was really intriguing. And we found incredible research, but what shifted my career was seeing these massive coral colonies that are thousands of years old die in 3 days. And it's kind of like being a voice for the voiceless. There's like, we won't have this to potentially even save us or help humanity if we don't protect it. And so that's what shifted my career into conservation. But I think the biomedical space in the ocean is immense. I mean, we don't even know what we're missing, frankly. And although some of the highlights been on corals, or there's even like chemical vents in the bottom of the ocean, there's animals that live there. And that's pretty wild that they've adapted to live in these very harsh, high pressure, high temperature environments. And there's so much we can learn from that. So I think it's just a matter of also some of the awareness. Like if you're looking at scientists that are studying like astrophysicists, right? Well, you can certainly, I think they'd find some of the same things in the ocean that would even show lights of like how evolution's happened and how these animals are able to survive in these really drastic conditions. And we're wanting to go live in drastic conditions on Mars. Well, let's learn about something that's already right here at our fingertips before, allocating all the resources to go far and beyond. I think there's so much we can learn, like that's literally at our feet. So it's pretty neat.
So focus.
Yeah.
So focus, and then you have the human element of, well, we're here, but what's out there?
Yeah.
So is there any like, not confrontation, space people and ocean people? Is there any
Yeah, I
collision?
mean, I don't know if it's necessarily like confrontation or anything, but there's definitely people that certainly disagree with like the priorities of funding, right? I mean, if you look at the sheer, I don't even know how much is spent, but just the sheer amount for a rocket launch, I mean, it's millions of dollars. How far would that go in ocean research, right? It's drastically different. And so how that's funded is often very different. A lot of that's privately funded now, right? You have the Elons, and I think there's a space for that. It'd be great to get someone like an Elon interested in the ocean. I think solving some of the ocean problems and meeting that immediacy of things that we need here will inform better decisions of us doing exploration, right? Like if you're studying these sponges or corals that are growing at the sea vents that are 3,000 feet below the surface in the darkness, what will that teach us about space? I think it can teach us a lot of things. And there's certainly scientists that are intrigued to study it, but it's also like a funding issue on both sides. So the more we can get cross-pollination and collaboration, I think the better.
Yeah, it can be very overlapping. Like a lot of collaboration could be used with space in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. That's why I would love for you to talk to Colin. We were going to meet at his lab, and maybe I can set that up with you. He's really big almost in the science way of, he talks about how corals were the original astronomers, basically, because they actually will use lunar cycles to map out their spawning to the exact day and coordinate with the thousands of corals.
Really?
Just based off of the celestial pattern of when we need to spawn and reproduce. And everyone does it at the same time. And the coordination of that, both biochemically and not having any eyes, and the advancement of these animals to be able to find somewhere to live as a little baby larvae that, they're going to settle out and claim this as their house. That kind of evolution is really an interesting thing to study. And he's super, very knowledgeable and like loves that side of the science of coral reefs and how they like build these cities, right? They build these underwater cities and they coordinate with each other on when they're reproducing and how they're building it, right? And so that's pretty neat. And we really don't know
neat.
That much about it. We're just learning another tech advancement. They've learned that using different sounds of a healthy reef can actually help recover a reef. So they'll take acoustic sounds of different systems to help in restoration, and that's shown to help. And so we're just now actually learning about like the sounds and how that element affects. We've seen that on basic studies of plants, for example, where they've played like rock music or classical. You look up an experiment on YouTube, and or there's these people that are like screaming at a plant. And so there's something about frequencies of sounds that's shown both biochemically to affect our bodies, affect nature. And so that's also relative to coral, whales, right? There's a ton of research now that is like going around sound and like its purpose and helping facilitate a healthy ecosystem. And whether or not, I don't know if that's almost like it's not necessarily a fake it till you make it, but the idea of using healthy reef sounds to recover a reef, like something that they can do. For example, we were actually looking at doing this as a study that was attached to DARPA, which the defense agency of the U.S. was interested in this. And of course, they have like some really crazy cool research people wouldn't expect. If you didn't know, DARPA actually, like with the government, started the internet from a DARPA award. Like it was just, they were trying to figure out something new. They had an award out, someone figure out how to make this. And so they put out these kind of very outlandish, like crazy ideas and projects for people to do. We bidded on one called Reef Fence, and they wanted to build these artificial breakwaters that could protect military bases but be a self-healing reef. So they wanted a reef that was resilient, that you could put corals out on it, that will keep repopulating, it'll keep protecting itself, so they don't have to spend these millions of dollars in sand and other methods to try to protect the base on the water. And so University of Miami won the award here in Florida, and we were like bringing in some other, we were trying to apply as a team by ourselves, and we're talking with Cornell and working with them on an acoustic side. So we were going to put these acoustics into the reef to attract herbivores. And specifically, the goal is to have algae reduction, because you don't want this to become like this green reef of just algae, because it starts growing in those coastal areas where there's high runoff. But what's a natural predator of algae is herbivores, like parrotfish and different fish. So, and tangs and everything. So we were planning to play basically fish sounds of that species to attract that fish to come live there through the sound. And this scientist has done a lot of research around that. And so that's become a tool that people are exploring. Functionally, I don't think it's been largely deployed, but we're starting to see all these little studies pop up. So that's just fun. There's little, have you ever gone diving?
Dove?
Yeah, scuba diving. Have you
ever? I thought it was an acronym like DARPA.
No,
no. Dove. What is that?
Yeah.
No, I like the land, breathing air here.
Yeah, you should try it. I mean, it's a whole nother world, quite literally. But when you do dive, you hear this. It's kind of a peacefulness of this crackle and pop sound underwater on a reef, and it's like all these little animals making different sounds, and that's one of them that they're trying to replicate. For a healthy reef should be very vibrant underwater. Like it doesn't sound like
a jungle.
Crazy. Yeah, like a jungle. You hear all these
yeah.
different sounds, and that helps kind of map the ecosystem. And so that's something that there's a lot of scientists focusing on that now. That's not my specialty, but I definitely recognize the value and exploration of it, and technology is helping it enable some of it, which is cool. But I think we can do way more development. And so where we'll be in like 10 years will be exciting.
If you're to put on your, not genie hat, imaginative hat, of like, what's something in technology from your imagination that could be applied in the ocean and overall raise the health in general all across the board? What's a technology from your imagination that could, what would that look like?
From my imagination.
Yeah.
That'd be tough, because it just depends on what problem you're looking to address.
Is there something that can be done and applied across the board? Or no?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
It's
That's
very
what I'm saying.
regionally specific.
Imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like you want to look at the problem though, right? Are we talking about pollution of plastics in the ocean? That's one hell of a problem.
One problem.
Right. We have, if you've heard of it's called the Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
The Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's 3 times the size of Texas
Yeah.
of plastic in the ocean. Times that, they're saying we have more microplastic than we do stars in our sky. And just the breakdown, we're even seeing microplastic on Mount Everest, And so that's one problem to address is microplastics. For me, I did come up with like a pretty creative idea to address that, but I'll get to that in a second. Some of the other big problems, right? Turning to carbonic acid, we're seeing, carbon and like from CO2 becoming a carbon sink. The ocean absorbs it. And although like corals build their skeletons from calcium, as too much absorbs into the ocean, it becomes acidic, which is what's affecting coral reefs. It's affecting fish building their skeletons. And so that's another set of problems, is like the water quality. There's pollution, right?
Okay.
There's the other huge one that people do not even really realize, the ocean conveyor belt current. I encourage you to look it up. It's the reason why we live on the planet, and it's the health of our oceans. And what it is, it's a series of essentially, you can think of a massive current that wraps around the planet, and it's driven from temperature differences. So you have upwelling and downwelling that brings, upwelling will bring nutrient-rich water from the depths up, and downwelling will push it down and move it around. It moves around the whole planet, and it provides all of our little microcurrents and provides life. And it's why we have the climates that we do. And without it, we would not be able to live on this earth. Okay. And so as you reach the peak of the temperature differences, we're looking at eventually halting that current completely, because we don't have enough of a temperature difference to drive the current. And that's kind of like, as you know, with physics, like hot air rises, right, if we're in a room. And it's the same kind of...
So if there's no variance, it just kind of...
It will be stagnant eventually.
Flats.
And that's what people are worried about, in the long run. And so that's a massive problem to address. So we're talking about, those are just 3. There's a whole slew of other ones. And I think of the most importance, I'd say the ocean conveyor belt one's one of the biggest, but you got to look at it.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest. But, pollution, of course, is another one that's focused on a lot. And some of that becomes down to an individual level of how can you be an eco-conscious consumer. For me, we have a lot of great products out now that could completely eliminate single-use plastics today, but we're not doing them. Why? Well, regulatory-wise in the States, it's not enforced. You could drive the cost down of those products if you did enforce it. So it's a kind of a priority shift, and I think it's something that we could look at, but I kind of look at this also from the scientist lens, because I was a microbiologist first, and as I was looking at, more of a marine ecology versus that lens, we actually have bacteria that can digest plastic. So how cool would it be to have a biodigester at a recycling facility? Recycling is very controversial because, one, if you don't have a facility that can recycle all grades of plastic, which is very rare to have one that can, you also have to educate the consumer of what can I recycle, what's not actually recycled, and then what do you do with it if you can't recycle it? And that answer varies depending on where you live. And not every facility you can't recycle efficiently, and not every product you can recycle at all. And so it would be really neat to have something of a facility of its own, similar to a waste management that was required by the government, to have a biodigester of these plastics and things that could be consumed. We can make biogas and fuel out of organic waste, for example. That's already being done. But we don't have these big biodigesters. We could have programs that could mobilize using food waste and using plastic waste and breaking that down to its elemental form or reusing it in some way. It's just incentives is a big thing, right? And how are you going to drive that? I think that's a really great solution to the plastic problem, because you can stop more plastic from being produced or put into the environment. You still have to address what's there. That's a tough one to address. But the microbial side, I think that's founded most of all life, right? So I think going to science and natural solutions to address these problems are one of the best things that we can do if we're informed well enough to do it, right?
So these microplastics.
I'm sure you've heard about it, right?
Yes, but it seems like is this the thing that humans 300 years from now will be like, I can't believe they use that much plastic on everything and consume that much plastic. They wrap their food in plastic, they blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I'm sure.
Are microplastics a universal thing that it's terrible for humans?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
This is something I heard too. I'm sure you've seen in the grocery store, they have the little plastic bags for vegetables. It's like, what's the point of that? There's like no point. They do make a lot of them
They hold stuff
to be biodegradable. Yeah, but you could just put it in your cart. You already have a cart. You can
You don't
bring
want
it.
your
You can bring a
vegetables to
bag.
get
Well, touch it.
touch the metal, but
do
you're
you know
touching
what
the
they've
plastic, I
touched
guess?
before they got onto the shelf?
I know, yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? You should wash them anyway.
We imagine that it
You
just shows
putting
up
in
at the
that
grocery
little
store
bag
and it's just like
does
right there.
nothing except for your own psyche. Like, it does absolutely nothing. So that's what's really funny to me is like we do all these like things that are kind of nonsense, like not needed, just because, you know, it's like it's already gone through so many things. Putting that little plastic bag on it does nothing. You're going to wash it anyway. So it's like some of that stuff can be really cut out of the system and it wouldn't create any issues.
Wait, so just getting back to microplastics, so elaborate in a simple way of why microplastics are harmful to humans.
Well, we're still researching those effects on your physiology. Like if you can think of just like it's an inorganic material that they've literally found it in people's blood. Like we apparently eat about a card, like your credit card's worth of plastic every year without knowing. And that accumulates in our tissues and we can't transport that out of our body as efficiently. The chemicals that are in that, a lot of it, you know, comes from like fossil fuels, for example. And that toxicity in our body, it's not just about passing the plastic. You actually absorb and break down those chemicals into your body. So the way that affects us is it can be vastly different. I mean, that's even, you know, on the pollution side, the other component of that is like a lot of the water that we drink too. A lot of wastewater facilities don't have filtration for things like pharmaceuticals. And if you think of like all the people that are on a variety of cocktails of drugs, we actually, I think in the States, we're like the leading pharmaceutical producer in the world. In Florida, I think
Producer or consumer?
Consumer. Like we, as Americans, have everything under the sun.
I want
Pills for depression, like birth control. If you think like birth control itself, these hormones that are being like literally not filtered for, going right back into the groundwater. We still have injection wells in Florida,
Okay.
Some of them, not all of them, where they just go beneath the water table, inject all the wastewater, which eventually will leach back out. And so it's like, where are we sending all of this? And I think personally, you know, pharmaceutical companies should be responsible for putting filtration at these facilities so you're stopping waste. There's this incredible scientist who did a study here in Florida from Fort Lauderdale all the way down to the Keys. And they took 1,000 samples of different fish and trophic levels. And so what that means is like what the fish eat, like different levels on the food chain.
Okay.
So they looked at algae samples, they looked at crabs, they looked at the fish themselves. Every single sample had a cocktail of drugs in them, from antidepressants to like stuff for like steroids to birth control. And you see that affect the physiology of the fish too. Some fish are becoming like non-aggregating that are normally with their like family of fish in a sense. And so there's so many adverse effects that we're seeing happen to the marine environment, but also how is that affecting our health, right? How is that affecting the water that we consume? And I don't think anyone's testing for that. So it's just something, it's pretty crazy to be aware of, but like that reminded me from the microplastics, like the amount of pollution that we're just kind of nonsensically adding to the environment, and we're being more reactive to it than having the forethought and being proactive is pretty crazy when you get into the minutia of things that are actually happening around us, from like microplastics in your blood to even the hormones that can come in through water. Like if you drink tap water.
It's hard to communicate to Americans in a simple sense that, like on a microbiological level of that, it's hard to picture because you can't see it.
Yeah, it is difficult. And that's why it's not as much of a problem that's in front of people's faces, because you don't see people like dropping dead right away, right? But I think it's a hard thing to put right in front of people until it becomes a bigger issue, and we're, I think, you know, moving towards that, unfortunately, where it will take some bigger catalyst to shift the responsibility and priority of things that we focus on.
I'm curious,
But I mean, logically, if you walk through that, it makes sense on how that can have an effect, right? Like, even
Logically, yes.
from the hormonal perspective, like
Yeah,
if you look
absolutely.
at how drugs assimilate in your body, a lot of it actually is excreted in urine. And the amount of people on, just let's say like during COVID, we had to have a peak of antidepressants and things like that going out. And that a lot also goes down to like the system of prescriptions. Like we do prescription push in the US a lot.
I want to see a bar graph of prescriptions written in the US and then, or just all countries.
Yeah.
Just on a scale.
Yeah.
It'll be like,
Yeah, it's pretty high. And I'll send you this paper by this scientist. I mean, it was a very thorough study, very eye-opening, makes you almost question like what you eat quite a bit. And I don't think people ask that question enough. Like, where's my food coming from? Like, what can I do as a individual to make sure I'm, consuming something that's healthy, ethically sourced, and that's difficult because there's not a lot of consumer transparency. And that's with anything we use, right? Where things end up. If you have that plastic water bottle, like you pretty much, after you put it in a bin, even if it's the recycling, that's the end of your thought process on that. Like no one's thinking about where it's going.
Transitioning a little bit, a question I've always had is, if we think that we're a technically advanced society, how come we can't take salt water and make it drinkable yet?
We are doing that, actually. Desalinization is becoming more popular. The problem with it, they're still trying to find ways to make it more efficient in terms of just the energy consumption to do it is high. And so it's not the most effective thing everywhere, right? And that's where I think, from a planning perspective, using your nature to your advantage, like you're not going to do solar in like Seattle or, like Florida, great state for it. You're not going to do wind energy. You could do a little bit in Florida, depending on where you're at, like off the water. But using that nature to decide, okay, what's the most sustainable way to produce energy, food, right? We have golf courses in Arizona. Why? Why the heck are we doing that? So it's just like looking at both of the nature for, from a human production and consumption perspective. That's like agriculture, what you're growing. We're used to this immediacy. And so I think desalinization will be a great resource. I mean, even creating ocean energy is, like, I don't know, I'm baffled on why we haven't done more of it. I'm actually working with a company called Tidal Sails to help bring them to the US. They're in Norway, but they're using a technology to kind of similar. Have you been skiing or on a ski lift?
Yes.
Okay. It's on this kind of 2-pulley track that just goes around. And they basically have these sails, looks like a sail on a ship that's underwater on a similar belt. And it picks up low current velocities. So you can actually generate high amounts of power through low current areas. Because in a lot of the cases, like creating a dam, they have to create high velocity currents to generate enough energy. So if we can help capture using areas that have a lot of low velocity currents, which is a lot of areas, we could actually really convert to like localized energies for like a town or a city more efficiently, and also be able to take into consideration, like it's not like offshore wind or like doing large infrastructure that is not only a large investment, but also can have impacts on the environment. So I think it's, taking all those factors into place, and we're definitely coming to a technologically like advanced state where we're better equipped to make designs that tailor to each area, but we're not, some of it's the incentive and priorities, I think. I think we have a lot of great solutions on the table. We have a lot of great people working on great things. We just got to get them together and make sure we're doing the right thing for that environment, right? So we'd be doing something different per state, in terms of energy production, food production, and that's what needs to be done, right? Work with nature, not against it.
Yeah, I love nature.
Yeah, the plants.
Are these real or fake? I can't.
They're real.
They're real.
They like except for that parrot,
I love. I've been doing some traveling, and probably one of my favorite things is just exploring the flora and fauna that's there. It's just, oh my God, it just energizes me so much. I'm so excited. And just walking around, it's just so magical to see all these palm trees. Palm trees are very special to Midwest people.
Yeah. It's like your paradise piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was so cool. Like when I was in Los Angeles, the plants were different from visiting Venice by the ocean versus West Hollywood up in the hills more.
Yep.
The altitude, it looked more like what I've seen in San Francisco. And it's amazing that nature just kind of sorts itself out.
Yeah.
Just kind of does its thing.
It's like, this is my space
Yeah.
to grow here,
No, plants? Okay, I wrote this in my notebook the other day. I was sitting by the ocean. Or was I sitting by some plants? I don't know. But I feel like nature and plants are just like healing. Like I can feel myself
feel
better.
More connected and at peace, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Shouldn't we kind of apply that or scale it more to the public?
Yeah. Actually, so the TED Talk I just gave was around through serving nature, we serve ourselves. And for me, the biggest problem I see in humanity is our disconnection with nature. That comes from even the food that we eat. And there's a certain amount of, I started my talk out with a quote from the Mohawk tribe from the Thanksgiving address. And it says, we send thanks to all animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us as people. We're glad that they're still here and hope that it will always be so. And there's something about, I wanted to have something that captured the type of respect that any native tribe, any of our ancestors had, and their connection to the environment was, obviously completely drastically different than what we are today. And there's like a power in the healing components of actually being able to be immersed in nature. Like there's scientifically, if you've heard of like grounding, if you have your shoes and like your sneakers on all day, you're actually not getting the magnetic forces from the earth. Okay. That if you were to go walk on, it was said like if you can just walk for 10 minutes in the grass barefoot or on the beach, that you'll feel a boost of energy. You'll feel healthier. If you prescribe nature to people don't really do that, but you'd find way more connection to yourself and an appreciation for the nature. And that's also like what I talked about through my talk is this vastly varies depending on where you grew up, your culture, what you eat, and how you handle your waste. All of that forms into your own framework of how you treat the environment, how you connect with it, how you respect it. And, that's the biggest thing we have to tackle is like, how do we go into this societal framework and change that relationship? How do you make people care? How do you make people feel more connected? And it's gonna be different for each of us, right? I did like a little mindfulness activity and, asked people to think about where did you feel the most connected to nature? Like, what did that look like? What did it sound like? How did you feel there? And was that where you grew up? The answer to that's probably not. It's probably immersed in raw nature. And for me, I had a lot of that growing up because I rode horses and I'd walk on the beach. And I'm blessed to grow up in a beautiful state that I have a lot of access to nature. And I think it's something that's resonated through me making my career decisions and having a love for nature that has turned into the work that I do. But there is such a powerful healing component of being immersed in nature and finding a connection to that wherever it may be, whether it be your palm trees, right, or seeing plants and hearing birds, whatever that may be. There's undoubtedly a healing, very natural process that's been demonstrated for generations. And I think we all need to get back to that. And that's one of my encouragements and one of my takeaways from that talk was to encourage people to find and connect to their nature. And that's finding the nature that inspires and brings you peace and actually feel that connection. And I think traveling really gives you a lot of different perspectives and also gratitude for where you grew up, maybe awareness of what other conditions people have. And even if, like, I've traveled a lot to Mexico, for example, and they have beautiful cenotes, which is similar to our springs here, but a little different in terms of how the water's fed. And I have so much respect and appreciation for how they treat those cenotes. They have a lot of cultural significance, and they actually make everyone who goes and visits, they have to completely rinse off head to toe. No sunscreen, no bug spray allowed there, period. And that's helping reduce some of the eutrophication. And I was just like, wow, why aren't we doing that in Florida? Like, if you look at the historical record of our spring systems, they've gotten destroyed, especially like at an exponential rate through the last 15 years, where they used to be beautiful, crystal clear, and now they're like, you know, pukey green algae blooms all throughout the springs. And it's having, you know, effects on, I'm sure you've seen, like, manatees are dying. There's less seagrass because the seagrass can't grow because the algae blooms, and there's a cascade of effects. And ultimately, I think a lot of that, like, all resorts back to having this disconnection, right? We're further removed from nature. And I just genuinely think through finding that connection again, we can move forward in a more conscious way to, like, work with nature and grow with it.
My core philosophy is humans are meant to be in nature or with each other. And that's like my driving, like...
I like that, yeah.
I try to align everything I do with that decision, or align decisions I make with that philosophy and that core belief. Is that true? It's true, right?
I think it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's there was another speaker that was talking about how, like, gratitude is also another, like, driver of humanity, and that connection of being able to serve others. Like, we're either, like, born to, you know, feel that connection through serving and being with people, or, you know, immersed in the environment. And I think that's definitely true. And I mean, you grew up on a farm, right? And so, but you've also, like, lived and loved cities.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be an interesting dynamic for you, because you've come
Absolutely.
from very different worlds. So I'd be curious to, like, hear your version of, like, where do you feel the most connected to nature? Where do you feel the most gratitude for being immersed in nature? Like, what you've traveled a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like for you?
So one of my guys I really like, Phil Jackson, head coach of the Chicago Bulls and Lakers, won 11 championships. I've studied his philosophy, implemented it, and something he would do and teach his players is having a safe spot where you can go mentally to just recharge, find calmness, and be energized moving forward. So sometimes when he would call timeout, he wouldn't go over plays. He would just have everybody, the players, just close their eyes and just think back to that space that they've gone over in practice before. And so mine is, we have a pond on the farm, and these 3 big oak trees. And whenever I'm home, I just, like, sit under them. We have a woods, and I walk through the woods, and I do nothing. I'll have campfires. I really like campfires. I think there's something so connecting to just, like, raw fire, right?
Yeah.
And I can just sit there for 3 hours without my phone, without anything, just stare at the fire. That's where, that's, like, my most centering space. And with cities, I love
the people element, probably.
The people. Because everybody's a little different.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Everybody's human, and we all have the same, we're all the same. But there's just these little, like, tweaks in the culture, and I like exploring that of, in Miami, people are wearing, like, this. People are really into this. There's just slight little characteristic things, and it's so, like, endearing and precious to me that I love observing that. It really stimulates me.
Yeah.
And I learn from that, and it helps me kind of put together say, a puzzle of the world or life just a little bit better. Like each trip is just like a little bit better. Just a little bit more here and there, and it just kind of fills in these imprints. For those that use iPhones, the old ones used to have this thumbprint. And yeah, we have iPhone 8s.
It's still going, right? You don't have to do anything?
What's that?
It's on?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have this thumbprint, so it asks you to do it once. It gets the big impression. Then it asks you to do like the side and like all these little nuances. So that's what, like coming to a place, say multiple times, is like filling in the nuances, but then going new places, it's like, wow, I got an impression of it.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the concept of staging. So putting my physical body in just like a setting, a situation, and then just see what happens.
Okay.
So on like a smaller scale, it would be, for example, I'll go to like hotel lobbies and I'll just like sit and see what happens. Something typically happens. On a larger scale, cities, placing myself in a city and just kind of walking around and just see what stimulates me, because my mind, if I'm living somewhere for a while, say Chicago or the Midwest, everything is kind of, I've seen it. My mind has seen it, or my senses have absorbed it.
Right.
But then, most recently, in like Los Angeles, I have spent very little time in Los Angeles. So just placing myself there, staging myself just in the city, my body and my mind were just so stimulated. I use that word so much. Everything is new. And I'm sensing so many different things, the smells, the vibrancy of the colors, the energy from both nature and other people is just so remarkable. So that's kind of a picture of nature and with people. It's like
Coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that kind of explains a lot of, right, the human experience, right? It's sensory, it's feeling things, it's adapting, it's being put in situations that make you feel alive and like, being present. I think
alive, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like presence of that moment, right? And I think that's what's so awesome about traveling is, we're not trees. We don't have to stay where we're at. And so much as you can see, like these cities have different imprints. That's why I really resonate with the fact that like we're products of our environment. And so it's great when people can change that up, because you can also form your own sense of identity, your own sense of really awareness that otherwise you might not be exposed to. And although not everyone can travel, that's something that's, I think unique that you can explore within your own city, within your own town, of how you can be a little bit more aware of things that you're doing, and connection to nature. So I think it's really exciting. And I mean, I really enjoy the same thing, like in traveling to different parts of the environment and nature. And it's actually funny, when I was like really excited to bring my boyfriend to Gainesville for my talk. And, I've just always like appreciated nature on a whole nother level. And as you were talking about sensory, like I'd taken like all of the sounds, the colors, the trees, the air, the wind, and like every little element that makes you enjoy that presence of the moment. And anytime I'm in nature, like you can kind of sense that like healing or like gratitude of that presence. And in Gainesville, it's totally different from growing up on the coast. It's no ocean around it, in the trees and woods. And there's a area called Payne's Prairie in Gainesville, which was a historic preserve. Native Americans used to inhabit there, and they brought bison. It was like one of the more agricultural based foods that they ate. And there's still wild bison there, so they're protected. There's wild horses, all kinds of animals. So I was like really excited, because I used to go there to find like my own connection during school. If I was stressed, I'd go for a run through the woods in Payne's Prairie. There's like a whole prairie that's open to, and you can always see wild animals and be like immersed in nature. And so it just reminded me of you saying that, because I took Michael, I was like excited to show him. And it's really rare to see the bison, like even so much so that a lot of students that go to UF, like if they didn't see them, they're like, oh, they don't exist. You know, they just like, not everyone says that, but it's kind of a blessing to see them. And so we go to this other trail, and it's called La Chula, and they used to have, like, it was like 15 feet across and water on each side, and gators used to line the banks. So you'd walk right in between a bunch of gators, and it was just like these massive guys just hanging out, sunbathing.
Wow.
It was super cool. Unfortunately, they had that trail closed, so I was like excited to bring them. And while we were there, like, we were just like taking everything in. We saw a lot of gators, a lot of birds, but this neat, like, little nature experience. We were walking back and saw this osprey like pick up a fish and was like flying off with it. And this eagle comes by and snaps it from him and like makes him drop it, catches the fish midair and just flies off. And we're like, oh my gosh, he's like a bully. You know, just like, it's nature being like raw and like authentically that. And I was like, this is just so funny. Like, you know, and that's our like, you know, national bird, which was kind of cool to see. And I actually saw this the morning of my talk, and I just was like wanting to go be in nature. And then we heard the bison were like sighted at this other trailhead, so we drove over there really quick, and he got to see the bison. So I was like, this is so awesome. Like,
cool.
All of that in the morning, and it just felt really like connecting for me, at least, because I was talking about connection to nature, and I got to go in the morning and like literally see all these different things that I really appreciated when I was in school. And, you know, growing up with horses, I would take horses out through the trails, and that was like my most peaceful presence. Like I'd have a list of horses I'd have to work in the morning, and I'd go take them on cool down trails. And I'd sometimes, you know, at 6 a.m., 5:30, be walking in a beautiful morning in like the woods in Florida. There's like fog lifting from the ground, and there's like crickets settling their chirps, and you hear birds awakening, and it's just like the most peaceful, like silence, but like beautiful nature sounds.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm sure everywhere is different, but it's something that like I've always grown up with an appreciation for it. So like whenever I travel, my favorite things to do is like go in nature somewhere, like hiking or in the ocean. And when we were talking about grounding, actually, it said that like being in the ocean is like the best grounding you can get, because it's like completely connected and immersed in an aquatic environment of like activity and stimulation. But it's also very peaceful at the same time. Like you're just with yourself. So it's cool. I encourage it.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got your land-based connection. I'd love for you to experience the
someday
fully immersive.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation, and I always like ending the conversation with one question, and that's, what are you curious about recently?
What am I curious about recently? Oh, that's like a tough question right now, because I'm like all over the place. But I mean, I would say something that's intrigued me more has been like this kind of combo of like gray and green infrastructure, but on land. And I think it's something I'd love to get into later, of like curating architecture with nature and like greening spaces. So I'm curious on really just enabling that, like from an architecture perspective of how can we bring in nature and like more biodiversity. I'd say I'm the most interested in that right now, because I've also been looking at like finding some like somewhere to live over here. I live on the west coast of Florida, and a lot of it here, I'm like, you know, I'd love to make a Florida native garden, and you know, obviously a lot of the architecture is very different. So I'm like thinking about that right now, of like how can I find a place that I can kind of tailor and modify to be a little bit more unique and connecting to nature, like at my home. So that's probably on my list right now.
That's amazing. Beautiful. Well, thanks for being here. This is always fun. Thanks you.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun.